Luke and Sarge here, and welcome to another episode of the Young Professionals podcast. Luke, who's our guest today?
Sarge, today we're talking to Callum McCaskie, who is a PhD candidate through the Edith Cowan University in Western Australia. Callum's PhD is in the field of sports science, and he is currently completing his coursework at the West Coast Eagles AFL Football Club. Cal, as we know him, is also the sports science coordinator for the female development soccer program at Football West, the governing body for soccer in Western Australia. Cal completed his Bachelor of Exercise and Sports Science at Deakin University before completing his honours year at Federation University. Cal has a broad resume in the sports industry with both paid and volunteer positions at multiple professional sporting clubs, including Richmond AFL Football Club in Melbourne and the Melbourne United Basketball Club. Cal is no stranger to taking risks in his pursuit of following his career aspirations, having recently moved to Perth from Melbourne to undertake his PhD. Callum, you're a great man. Welcome to the show.
Thanks, boys. Thanks for having me. Absolute pleasure.
It's good to see you, mate. I think a good place to start is the obvious place, which is the PhD that you're doing at the West Coast Eagles at the moment through Edith Cowan. Why don't you run us through that? And there's obviously a lot to unpack there. Why don't you run us through what it means to be doing a PhD, particularly in sports science, and then maybe run us through the day-to-day and what you are actually doing?
Yeah, sure. So I guess my PhD might be a little bit different to some other PhDs because it's industry funded and industry based. So you're not actually, while it's through Edith Cowan University, like you said, it's actually based in the industry. So I'm fortunate enough to be based down at West Coast Eagles Football Club. And like you said, it's in sports science. So I guess if you talk about other PhDs being the industry funded ones, there's obviously you can be based at football clubs or hospitals or even government organizations like the CSIRO. Otherwise, the majority are based at universities. So I guess the opportunity to work in the industry as part of the PhD was extremely attractive to me. And that's most of the reason why I decided to go down this path. So I guess day to day at West Coast, you kind of have to, you're kind of inclined to do a lot of like pro bono work as well. So as much as you do your PhD when you're at the club, and there's a lot of allocated time towards that, you're obviously also helping out around the club with sort of monitoring or helping out in the gym, with the boys lifting weights, or you might be on the track helping GPS monitor, so tracking the running of all the players at training and stuff like that. And even before they get on the track, you're kind of tracking their wellness or a few little strength exercises to make sure the boys are fit or no injury concerns, I guess. So that's kind of a day-to-day or day in the life of at the moment.
Day in the life of Callum McCaskie. Mate, I think there's a lot to unpack there, and particularly in the broad sense of what a sports scientist is. But before we get to there, someone that's come through, just an undergraduate degree, when I think of a PhD, you think of the old professors with the white hair standing at the front of the classroom. What is a 26-year-old, 27-year-old rather doing a PhD for, and why make that choice so relatively early in your career?
Yeah, good question, Luke. I think for me, and it's not just the sporting industry. It's like there's a lot of industries, obviously, but the sporting industry in particular, it's very competitive. The positions, especially in sports science, are really scarce. So for me, it's always been about differentiating myself. How can I do that? And I kind of started trying to do that early on in my undergrad, and I've slowly just trying to keep doing that. And I think doing your PhD and specializing in a particular area is one of the ways you can kind of do that. So that's probably the main reason why I've gone down that path. But if you'd told me that when I finished year 12 that I'd be doing a PhD in a few years, I would have laughed at you, I think.
Yeah, I think if anyone said that anyone in our kind of circle of friends was going to be a PhD in 5 or 6 years, I think the answer would have been, are you sure?
Yeah.
But on that track as well, since it's a PhD in sports science, I think the lay person would just think that what is a sports scientist, and having a general chat with you, it's quite evident that there are different avenues that you can go down. So what particularly are you focusing on in your PhD compared to, say, someone else that's in doing the same PhD but in another discipline?
Yeah. So I guess the typical sports scientist, I guess, and when sports scientist gets thrown around a lot, and I guess there's still different roles you can go down, but the one thing that sports scientists normally do day to day is they monitor athletes and usually track their loads. We just say monitor loads, and you're monitoring their wellness, and you're trying to keep. Basically, it's their job to keep them, I guess, as fit as possible without while reducing their risk of injury, I would say. So improving their fitness and their performance, reducing injury. And so that's my PhD. And it's a big thing in the AFL is trying to prevent injury, because injury costs clubs, thousands and millions of dollars. I think it's costs every club about $2 million a year on injuries, having players out and player wages and stuff.
So that's just, a weekly wage of a $1 million player salary per year sitting on the bench per week. That's the cost you're talking about there.
That's it. It. So the 45 guys on an AFL list currently, and then the amount of injuries that on average that happen to each club every year, that's costing them $2 million. That's just having them off the park. That's not including, say, your rehabilitation and extra scans and surgery and stuff. So I guess it's trying to prevent injury or investigating the risk factors surrounding injury is such a big thing in all sports, I guess, but the AFL in particular. So my PhD is looking at lower limb injuries, particularly lower limb, because they're the ones that are mostly, I guess, training load related. So you see a lot of the injuries to upper body are more like contact, and you can't kind of prevent someone from hitting the ground or getting a bump sometimes. But it's the hamstring injuries, for example, when they're running, like they're preventable injuries. So it's we're looking at, or I'm looking at in my PhD, is more about looking at the player's strength, how much running they're doing, and also what they look like from a physical perspective. So how much muscle mass they have in the lower limbs, and how strong their bones are, and trying to relate that back to injury and why some people don't get injured, or why do they get injured less than others, and what's the difference. And hopefully in the next 2.5 years, I'll have an answer for you.
Well, maybe if we take a few steps back and go back to you did your Bachelor of Science at Deakin University. And when we're talking before the show, you mentioned that there's a practical element to that, and you have to complete a certain amount of voluntary hours, I think.
Yep. Yeah. So in the sports science, I guess your third year, and it's probably similar to a lot of other courses where you have to get practical experience. So in sports science, in particular, the exercise and sports science at Deakin, you have to get the 140 hours in the industry as part of one of your units. So I had my eye on one thing, and that was to do my hours in elite sport, and was fortunate enough to land down at Richmond Football Club.
And what was your approach to securing that? Because I don't think, if my memory serves me correctly, it wasn't the easiest thing to secure.
Nah, it was weird. So the university sends out emails to all the students about, here's the opportunities, and so you can kind of bite at those if you want. But there was literally nothing about the AFL at all, so or any of the elite sporting clubs in Melbourne. So I kind of just had to take a bit of a risk and use my initiative. So I just went on to the websites of all the AFL clubs in Melbourne, and also some A-League and Melbourne Storm as well, and just tried to find an email address for the closest person who would be in the sports science position, I guess, and just sent my cover letter and CV to all them, asking for university or prac hours, basically. So there was nine AFL clubs, and then 2 soccer and Melbourne Storm. So I sent out 12 resumes and only heard back from 2. Heard back from the Demons, Melbourne Football Club, and Richmond. And Richmond were the only ones to offer me an interview. So lucky I got an interview somewhere, but yeah, it was very lucky.
What were your first few days at Richmond like?
Well, to be honest, very nervous. I thought I'd be all right, but I was overawed. And I think so I was based actually with Choco Williams. Mark Williams was the one that first kind of got all the interns. There was 5 of us that started at the same time. And but even at the end of the year, he'd said one of the negatives was I was a bit overawed by the environment. So, which is probably true. I was probably a bit nervous, but I guess the more time and you spend there, and I think it was a good experience. And you realize shortly after, like, they're just normal blokes who are good at footy. So, but yeah, it's hard when I'm also a Richmond supporter, so I think that played into it a little bit too.
Weren't asking them all for signatures too early.
Yeah, definitely didn't do that.
I think just going back one step to your strategy of emailing all of the AFL clubs and the other sporting clubs in Melbourne, obviously a good one, and it ended up really well for you. Yeah. But for a young person who hasn't been in the industry before, is looking for some experience, and this can equate to, it would be the same for any industry, those cold emails or those cold calls can be quite intimidating. What was your strategy with that? And did you appeal to any particular things when you were writing the email? And to help you with that, did you speak to anyone and say, hey, what should I be saying in this, or what angle should I be taking in these emails? Or was it kind of just on the fly?
Yeah, it was, like you said, it was very disheartening to when you don't hear back, and you put a lot of effort into sort of personalizing every cover letter towards that club that you're applying for. But no, from memory, I kind of just winged it in a way that I had a little bit of experience sort of in first and second year uni, just doing working with junior football clubs, like as a sports trainer, just running water and sort of strapping and sort of really basic things. But I think having something like that on my resume on top of where I was working at a supermarket at the time definitely helped, I think, instead of just having done absolutely nothing, because I think Richmond from memory asked a lot about that, that other experience. So I'm glad I kind of had that. But in terms of writing up my CV and stuff, I think I might have asked my parents maybe even for some help on a cover letter, but I think that was about it, really.
And going back even further than that, back to university, when you're doing your Bachelor of Exercise Sports Science, what were the drivers to get into that degree, and why did you put that down on your preference list after year 12? And what are some of the other things that people in your cohort ended up doing? Because I assume they're not all pursuing PhDs at AFL footy clubs now. Where does that degree lead to, and what should people kind of be aware of when they're thinking of undertaking that degree?
Well, like most teenage boys, Sarge and Luke, I love sport. So for me, it was kind of like, I'm just interested in sport. Like, I just want to work in sports. So I think from early on, like year 9, year 10, it was in my head that I wanted to do sport. And I thought the science of sport and PE kind of gives you, PE studies in year 12 kind of give you a little bit of a taste for what it's like. So I think that's the whole reason I kind of went down that path. But, like I said before, it's so competitive because, there's so many other people that do the same thing, like interested in sport, and that sports science is a popular one to do. So knowing I wanted to work in sport, but specifically elite sport, I guess that was and so my focus, like I said, on the practicum hours was to make sure I get into the elite sport. But you could do it anywhere. I know a lot of my mates that graduated did their hours in a gym. So they got some sort of exercise prescription, maybe prescribing exercise to the general population. And there's certain things, if you wanted to do your master's in exercise physiology, you had to do a certain amount of hours prescribing exercise. So those people went to a gym. Other people went to sort of VFL clubs or TAC Cups, so your state level under 18s. So there's definitely different avenues you can take. But I guess, and it's very hard because even at the time, I didn't know what job I wanted because it's still so broad. It's exercise and sports science. So it's, I guess, the earlier you know what you want to do in that sort of broad area, then you can start tailoring it. It's like, what experiences can I get? What prac can I do to help myself sort of go that way?
All those hours you mentioned, are they volunteer hours?
Yeah, I think I did. God, it would have been, I reckon I did over 2,000 hours at Richmond unpaid. Yeah, all volunteer.
And on that, what were you doing at Richmond?
So I was doing two different things. So the half of it was performance analysis. So I was paired with the forwards coach at the time, which was a bloke called Greg Mellor, who's no longer at Richmond, but he basically would obviously want to play a certain way or want his forwards to set up a certain way. And he would always send me some ideas about, so for the upcoming games, they were playing the Kangaroos. He'd say, I want footage from their 6 defenders who we think are going to play this weekend, and I want to find vision of them doing this or playing out from the back, or what do they do when the ball comes into the 50. So, and I'd have to go and back and send some clips or collect the clips for him and then send it to him. And that would help him for the week. So that was kind of half my week was performance analysis, doing some video work. And the other half was I was on the track putting in GPS units when the players walk onto the track, and then just sitting on a laptop basically. So when the drill starts, having a look, and they all have live tracking so the players know how much they're running during the session. And then when they come off the track at the end, I'll just take the unit and go in and analyse the data a bit further.
And so is a player's training load set before, like the week before? Is it set? Like how is that managed?
Yeah, so it's a good question. They usually sit down after a game. So the game finishes there. Well, that's the last thing of the week is the game. So once the game finishes and they get all the data from the game, then they'll assess how the players pulled up usually. So if there's no issues or no niggles or injuries or anything, then they'll obviously look back. And usually they look back even to like potentially 4 weeks behind to have a look at what they've done running load based over those 4 weeks. And then that helps plan and how well they're feeling. That plans the following week. And it's kind of a week to week kind of thing. And potentially even, and if they, pull up sore after train, then they'll have to tinker that. So it's ongoing. Every day is kind of different.
And as a sports scientist, how do you measure how the player's feeling? Is that a quantitative thing or a qualitative thing?
Yeah, good question. Both, I guess. So they have to do wellness questionnaires. Well, Richmond did and West Coast did, and most AFL clubs do. Or most elite sporting clubs would have some form of wellness questionnaire that a player would have to fill out before they train usually. So that assesses, how much they've slept or how much soreness they've got. If it's general soreness like fatigue, or is it specific, how motivated they are, if they're stressed. So these sort of things. And that gives, I guess, the coaches and the practitioners, sports scientists, as much information as possible to gauge, how that player is feeling at that moment and can they train, or what does their week look like?
And do you ever think that players might sometimes game that questionnaire because they might be hiding something and they want to make sure they get to play that week?
Look, probably. I don't really have a definite answer for that question. I'm sure players, usually there's, especially at the elite level, it's a bit of an honesty policy. And, the more honest you are, the more likely it is of working out in your favour in the long run. So, you try not to hide the players would try not to hide because it can really probably act disfavourably to them, especially when it comes to selection or something like that. So you try to build a culture where everyone's as honest as possible, and that helps the coaches, helps the practitioners. So,
Cal, I think you've given us a really good understanding of what a sports scientist would do, particularly at an elite club like an AFL club or anything of that caliber. But we're hoping that more people than just people interested in sports science will be listening to this. So I think an interesting point to ponder is the topic of volunteer versus paid internships and getting experience that way. And you touched on the fact that you had 2,000 hours at Richmond that was unpaid, but you undoubtedly got some great experience there that has led to employment after that. What are your thoughts, in the sports science industry, on one hand, on that balance, and then more generally as well? Do you think if volunteer positions come up, should people jump at them when they're at uni, or should they kind of wait to see if a paid opportunity comes up first?
In my experience, I think, especially early on, if you can, and if you don't have to pay rent or got a mortgage or anything like that, I guess I would be jumping at these opportunities as early as possible. And that's probably one thing I kind of wish I did maybe more in first and second year before your prac hours. I probably should have done even more sort of practical volunteer hours, because I think everyone kind of thinks, oh, you do your prac hours in third year, but the more experience you can get early on is inevitably going to work favors for you. So that would definitely be a thing if you can. And like you said, it's all about balance. Sometimes, like, you've got to obviously do some paid work to get by. But I think as much as you can, the unpaid work, I think, especially early on, because I think the older you get, the harder it's going to be. So I think you got to sort of take a risk early on and do as much as possible, because I think it's very invaluable.
Yeah, cool. And with the undergrad degree, you mentioned that after a couple of years you can figure out, oh, do I want to go into a master's in X, Y, and Z, and what path do you want to go down? How do you find out about them? If you say you're a first year undergraduate or even a year 12 student thinking of wanting to do a Bachelor of Exercise Sports Science, and then kind of thinking 2 steps ahead, what can I do after this? Where do you go to get that information? Is it the uni or talking to other people? How did you go about that?
Yeah, it's a good question. Obviously the undergrads and I guess, I don't know, maybe I was a bit naive at the time. I kind of thought, oh, I'll do my undergrad and then I might do a master's and then I'll just get a job in AFL. Like, that was kind of my thinking. But yeah, definitely
makes sense.
It's all worked out, mate.
No, it's definitely doesn't work like that. So I think the university definitely does educate you a lot more on the postgraduate options. And Deakin were very good at pushing their undergrad students to postgrad, because I think they understood also that it's so competitive, and not just the sporting industry. I'm sure there's other industries as well that they say, look, it's important that you actually do a postgrad in this area if you want a certain role. And so originally I was really keen on masters, but like I spoke about earlier, I really wanted to differentiate myself. So I didn't want to graduate I'd already finished my bachelor and graduated with 100 sports science students. I didn't want to then do a master's and graduate with another 30 or 40 students and have the exact same degree as well. So I thought, how can I differentiate myself? And that's why I chose honours. And then honours kind of leads into PhD if you want to, but that was kind of my thinking.
And what did you focus on in your honours year at Deakin University? At Federation University.
Yeah, so I tried to do honours at Deakin, but their projects were quite, I should say, rigid. So they kind of released the projects and say these are the ones that are available to do. But I didn't want to do any of them, and then none of them really interested me. And I was still at Richmond Football Club at the time. So I asked, and because I'd done a lot of volunteer work, as I said, like, I'd built up a bit of trust with them. So I was pretty confident that I could ask them and say, look, if I'm interested in doing honours, can I stay at the club and do honours here and collect the data that we've been collecting, and then just make a project out of that. So when Richmond ticked that off, it was just about me finding a university that was happy to do that. So Deakin, like I said, was a bit rigid, so they weren't really interested. And Victoria University is heavily linked with Western Bulldogs, so there was a bit of a conflict of interest there. And I tried, I think could have been maybe La Trobe as well, but in the end, the Richmond Football Club had worked with Federation University, and although they're based in Ballarat, I said, look, if we've worked with them before, I was pretty confident. I said, yeah, I'm pretty keen on doing this, so I'll just do it. And I think that was to be honest, my honours year was a big turning point for me, I think.
No, for sure.
Why do you say your honours year was a big turning point for you?
Well, again, like I said before, so it was really important that I differentiated myself. So I used the Richmond Football Club data, and I was able to complete my honours there. And my supervisors at Federation Uni were very, I guess, happy with the quality of the work. So we ended up getting it published. So for those listeners, yes, I can send the link somewhere if you want to read it. It's pretty boring, but that's been published.
And just to stop you, sorry, what does it mean to be published for the students listening?
So when you do an honours year, you're kind of writing like a research paper. So, you put in your introduction, your methods, this is how I did it, and these are the results. So I have to obviously submit it's like almost like a mini thesis to the university, and they mark it. And then if you wanted to, it's up to the student whether you then tweak it and I guess, and color a lot. I have to color a lot of words, almost 50% of it, I think, to fit it in, and basically submit it to like an international journal of sports science. It's like a peer-reviewed journal, so you got experts in the field that review it and see whether it's worthy for submission to the journal. And I luckily got through that stage, and it was published in early 2019.
There you go. I think going through the experience of having my exam papers reviewed by the examiner is bad enough. I don't think I could go through a peer-reviewed process. I don't think I'd make it through. How was that in terms of stress levels and taking it up a notch from an exam experience?
Yeah, so it's not. I guess it's not an examination per se. So you kind of, I could, if I wanted to, I could be working on it now, my honours, if I wanted to, but it was kind of like I wanted to kind of, while it was fresh in my mind, you kind of literally you have to reformat your honours into a format that the journal wants, and a certain word count of, each sort of area of the whole sort of thesis. And then you've got to submit it. And then I think the turnaround was long though. It was a nervous wait, because you're kind of waiting for sort of 4 to 6 weeks. Once I've submitted it to get, then I got results back saying we've accepted it, but you've got major revisions. So there was a lot of things I had to change, but inevitably they'd accepted it. So once I'd shown them that I'd made all these changes, they accepted it, and it was published into the journal.
Congratulations, mate. It's a big achievement.
Thank you. Yeah, appreciate it. So I guess on top of that, I was able to use a little bit more of the research that we'd done at Richmond. So not my honours per se, but took a snippet of it, and I ended up going to the Gold Coast and presenting at some of the research at the Australian Strength and Conditioning Association conference. So that was quite good too.
That's huge. And just on that, are you do you deal with other bodies like that at the moment as a way of staying like networking and being in the forefront of the industry?
Yeah, the main one definitely is ASCA, is the Australian Strength and Conditioning Organisation. So they're they like the regulatory body basically for strength and conditioning roles and in Australia, and they also have they do certification of strength and conditioning. So I've got my level 1, which is just run of the mill one, but good to kind of have, and that's definitely been a good organisation to be a part of, and they're heavily linked with Edith Cowan University. Actually, I think they're the major partners. So it's quite good. And at the conference, obviously, it's standard. You meet a lot of researchers and even practitioners in the industry too. So,
Cal, just taking a bit of a left turn, and this might be a hard one to answer because it's all kind of changing very quickly. But you touched on how competitive the industry is to get experience and internships and anything like that in a normal environment. Obviously, moving forward now after COVID, that it's going to just change the workforce for an extended period of time. What would you say to kids or students rather coming into university degrees from high school, or halfway through their university degree now looking for experience in the field? Where would you point them to go in terms of talking to people or trying to find those roles?
Yeah, I guess the important thing is not to do nothing. So always don't try to be too stagnant, and always try to be doing something. So if you can't, and if COVID's interrupted, maybe getting some practical hours, because all the community sport and in Melbourne in particular is obviously not running at the moment. You can still sort of, there's lots of online courses you can do. Even I did like an Excel course over the very start of COVID, sort of March, April. And that was just to upskill myself, because again, sports science is very data heavy. So, and sort of getting a bit more of a idea about Excel and a few different tricks and tips was really good. So I definitely would recommend just, there's a lot of free courses online, not just ones that are going to cost. And so it's just about, it's hard, but you got to try to do something and working out what jobs potentially you like, and what things you can kind of do to skill yourself in that area. And on top of that, like you said, like people like me or other people in the industry are more than happy to share their experiences. So I encourage students to just get in touch, whether that's on LinkedIn or Twitter or through email or whatever it is, because there's so many people out there willing to share their experiences and help, because I've been through it. It's difficult.
On that note, is there anyone that you reached out to when you were younger that you had a conversation with that really helped shape your journey?
God, not really, Sarge. It was more so that I think my mentor was the Richmond Football Club sports scientist, because I was kind of there for a couple of years. And then after that, it was the high performance manager at Melbourne United when I was there. So you kind of meet people along the way. And those two in particular were definitely early mentors for me, and I still keep in contact with both of them. So I think that's another important thing, is to sort of maintain or develop and then maintain these relationships, because you never know what opportunities might, pop up in the future, whether I finish my PhD and I've got nowhere to go, or, but if you keep in contact, there might be opportunities somewhere. So that was massive, I would say, huge.
I think that's a fantastic bit of advice, and it goes to the old adage of never burn a bridge, and make sure that you maintain relationships. And even Sarge and I are experiencing this with reaching out to people to come onto the podcast. We haven't spoken to some people in years, but just because you were a decent person to them back when you're at uni or at school, everyone's happy to have a chat. So I think that's a really good bit of advice. And leading into what you just said in terms of when you finished your PhD, you're obviously a pretty driven guy, Cal. What's the dream? What's the dream job? Assuming that you can fly to other countries and whatnot, hopefully. Where do you want to end up?
Probably the dream, Luke, is probably working in the English Premier League. I think I've got, as much as I've done a lot of work in football now with two clubs, I still think I've got a lot of knowledge, and I've played soccer before. So I think soccer, especially overseas, seems to be a lot more money in sports science. So that would probably be an avenue I'd love to take. So I guess that would be the absolute dream. I guess being able to do the PhD, it kind of gives me at least a foot into academia or research if I wanted to go down that path, even if it wasn't full time, as a supplement. So, but I think, I definitely love working the sporting environment and like being a team day to day. So I think, the dream would definitely be sort of elite sport and probably the English Premier League.
Do you have a particular club that you'd like to be at?
Leeds United, I'd say.
Leeds United.
Just come up.
This will put you on the spot a little bit, but I suppose it's kind of putting the second or third year undergrad Cal in PhD Cal's shoes. If you were trying to get in contact with someone at Leeds now and trying to follow that dream job, assuming that you were able to fly and stuff, how would you actually go about that?
Oh, I'd probably look them up on LinkedIn, to be honest, or go via Twitter. I think Twitter's a really good resource, and people are pretty open on that forum. So that would probably be my two avenues. Other than that, I know this is a bit kind of left field, but the Leeds United use the same GPS units as the AFL do, which is That's it. Yeah, Melbourne-based company. So,
Yeah.
or started in Melbourne. So I know a few people at Catapult. So I'd probably ask them to get me in touch with, maybe they've got a base in Leeds. So then from there, I could probably get in touch with who's their go-to man at the club.
I think that goes to exactly what you were saying, right? Like you're a nice person to anyone that you meet in the industry, and you never know who's going to know who. And it can often just be a case of, oh, hey, can you flick this person a message and mention my name? And then you've got, that warm lead, as people say. But that sounds like a good plan, mate. You should put it into action once you finish your PhD.
Yeah, I'll try to probably put it in a bit earlier than finishing my PhD, just in case something happens. But yeah, no, it's good. It's good. I think it's sometimes, like in the industry, you just have to, you have to use your initiative sometimes, and the opportunities aren't just going to come to you. You have to go to them, and you have to knock on doors sometimes. That's just the nature of it.
Mm. Yeah, I think if I've learned anything, it's that a lot of jobs aren't actually advertised, and quite often you need to kind of advertise yourself for the job rather than go apply for a job that's advertised.
100%. That's very good advice. I live by that one. 100%.
Well, on the topic of advice, Cal, what advice would you have for a Year 12 student who's considering jumping into the sports science field? Oh.
Yeah, no, be willing to do a lot of volunteer hours. And I would say make sure you absolutely love it, because it will be tough. There's times, so if you really love it and you're willing to work hard and do the unpaid work, I'd say go for it. And as we spoke about before, Luke, getting those volunteer hours in definitely, or in the sporting industry in particular, but I'm sure other industries is definitely the most important. So for those Year 12 students thinking about it, just be willing to work hard and get that experience early.
I think it's good advice for anyone looking to get into any industry.
Mm.
Cool. Well, on that note, mate, I think that's a good place to wrap up. Thanks very much for coming on. And I think anyone looking to get into sports science, or as I said, any industry, can take a lot of what you said on board and hopefully implement it to get that internship or talk to that person. That'll hopefully lead to the next step, and then a foot in the door in whatever industry they're trying to get into. So appreciate the time.
No, thanks, boys. Really enjoyed the chat. So thanks for having me.